right, everybody. Welcome to another Route Consultant weekly webinar. You may be seeing me from a little bit different location. Our office completely lost power today, lost internet. We got power, but we had to go tweak it and work from home. So you're getting a little bit different background of me. For those of you who've never been here or this is your first time, my name is Josh Gregory. I am the Vice President of Education here at Route Consultant. Our team ran hundreds of routes across the country in both P&D and line haul. And today we're really here to help any new buyers that are looking to get into the space for the first time, and also contractors who've been here for years. We want to make sure that this continues to be a place where we can all thrive, be successful, find efficiencies, add profitability wherever we can. For everyone who's here every week, welcome back. And again, whether you're brand new or you're here every week, we always want this to be a place where you can come and learn and find out new things about the industry and ask questions about anything that's going on. But before I get too much farther, I do have a quick disclaimer to read, as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Now, all that to say, like I said before, we do want this to be a place you can learn. So we will have time as we're talking today and at the end of today to ask questions. So at any point while we're talking, feel free to type those questions in and we'll get to it at the Q&A at the end. Just make sure that if you want your questions answered, you put it in the little Q&A box at the bottom of the window. There's a button for Q&A. If you put it in chat or if you just raise your hand, I'm going to miss it. So if you want to make sure to have your questions addressed and answered, make sure you put it in the button at the bottom of the window. So today, if you were here last week, we gave an introduction to these two, but we're going to be hearing from Amy and Dave Byers that are longtime FedEx contractors with a wealth of knowledge and experience. And today we're talking about something that a lot of you may not realize is already the time of year you need to be thinking about it, which is the peak season, that holiday peak season at the end of the year. And so why you should be thinking about it, why you should be planning for it already. So Dave and Amy, why don't you go ahead and come on and say hello and we'll get started.
Hi, I'm Amy Byers with Slicker Trucking. I work with David on the human side, human resources, operations, contracting, statistics, numbers, and all that good stuff.
My name's Dave. I am the president of Slicker Trucking, and I do a lot of the hands-on, the maintenance side, the day-to-day operations from the terminal standpoint, dealing with the terminal and kind of everything that goes into that with planning and the managers that work with us.
Perfect. So, I kind of already teed it up, but we're in July. Why is this already the time that you should be thinking about peak season? It seems crazy early.
So I think over the 18 years of us doing this, we used to start planning in October. Even as much as bringing people on seasonally first day in November. And progressively, it's just gotten earlier and earlier and earlier. And with our, Schedule L and some of the more concerns about general safety, as well as staffing, that time frame to get through CT training, picking your right candidates and all that. And then layering in availability of trucks where some rental companies are pushing until early October to commit and earlier. So it's really, put the target on our backs here. We started planning about 4 weeks ago with some, kind of just conversations amongst our management teams and FedEx. So it's here, definitely here. So but it's definitely changed in the 18 years.
Yeah. 18 years you've been doing it. Like, when you first started, when did peak planning really start? Like what was peak back then?
Oh, when we first started, the terminal ran these drivers called temps.
Okay.
And they would just say, hey, do you want to give some area up this peak season? And you say, sure. And they would take a temp and you'd carve out your worst, most rural area you had, and they would give it to that temp and it would kind of disappear for the whole peak season. And you would run all your tight in-town stuff and and deliver that. And after peak, you'd get it all back. And now it's transitioned to, you cover everything every day and no stop left behind.
And then some, sometimes your
Yeah.
neighbor stuff.
Neighboring terminals everywhere.
So back then, did they have you starting in July, or when did you start planning and doing peak season then?
That usually started right around Halloween. They would start to bring some temps in and run their classes. So around the end of October, and they would have them ready to go by, the week of Thanksgiving when it kicked up.
And they rented trucks.
And the terminal rented the trucks
You
and
would
put the drivers on. And
you would see Enterprise just bring, 40, 50 trucks in at a time, and they'd just be lined up against the fence.
Yeah, and I think that's a real kind of just signifies kind of the shift we've seen there, where a long time ago there were different things that FedEx kind of just owned and partnered with you on, but now it's more of like, hey, this is your territory, it's on you to do everything in it. And so we'll help you a little bit on paying you leading up to peak season, but it's on you to be ready when peak starts.
Yeah.
So, you said you started 4 weeks ago. What does that mean, started? Like, what are you doing this early in the year?
So I think the biggest thing is trucks and people and a general plan, kind of seeing what our staffing looks like currently, maybe having some real honest conversations, not maybe, but we had some real honest conversations with our managers about who they think is going to make it to peak. If anybody's on the fence, kind of what that looks like from an everyday standpoint. And also new people, do we think they're going to get ramped up, enough to be super independent, by peak, or does that look like they might be on maybe a sub-route or a starter route that they're on now? So I think those are the honest conversations that we've had already. And then right now, Dave's having conversations with our maintenance staff and with our managers about kind of what strategy we're going to put in place this year for trucks. Last year, Dave implemented, we bought like 25 new trucks from July until October. And then we decommissioned those trucks, as we talked about last week. We decommissioned those trucks from February until almost currently, until like June. So it took us 4 months to kind of work those out of the system. And this year, we're not quite sure what we're going to do, whether we're going to rent. Sometimes we buy used, older kind of mid-stage, smaller trucks, Nissans and things for new people to jump into. So that strategy is being worked on right now, because between availability, finances, and contract terms, you need to start thinking about it and at least identify, what that looks like to you.
Yeah. And just a quick general note before you guys go on. Some of you are contractors and this is the things you need to be doing. Some of you are investors who haven't purchased yet, but maybe in process. And one of the things you need to make sure is happening is that all of these things are being done by whoever you're buying from, or at least you understand what kind of planning and timeline they're putting in place. Because if you plan on inheriting a business, you want to make sure that you're not inheriting something that is, a couple months behind on peak planning. So just a side note as you're talking, don't think, oh, I haven't bought a business yet, so everything will be handled. Make sure that this is something you ask about in the process.
Especially if you're closing or kind of standing up in the next month or two, because you're going to have your hands full with the transition of coming on, on board and standing up, but don't let these things, don't get so focused on today that you're like, oh, that's, peak, because before you blink, I mean, it's July already.
Yeah.
I say that with my family, my business, everything, like we're half in, right? So that happened before I even blinked my eyes. So peak's going to be here in no time.
Rental trucks fill up quick. They fill all they don't have trucks to rent. So the sooner you set those reservations, the better. We talked today about peak scanners and even as small as scanner batteries and chargers. What's our plan for that? Being in multiple terminals, how will we offset the scanners and the scanner batteries, and drivers working longer hours, so they're probably going to need multiple batteries for a day. So we're trying to get ahead of it. So when it does happen, it's one less stress point for us.
Mhm.
And both of those things are important to, I think, both think and talk about. So what does the rental market look like? We've talked about it, that it's aggressive leading up to peak season. Like generally, if you are doing rentals, how early do you have to secure it? What kind of contracts are you seeing right now to be able to secure a truck for peak season? Like, what does that look like now that's different than normal times?
So different than normal. I think most companies, the availability is there, whether it's Enterprise or Hertz or Penske or, any of the other merchants has them. Merchants used to do month to month. Enterprise used to do month to month. But because of the peak season between us and Amazon and, all the other delivery companies, they're booking up pretty quickly and they're requiring some significant time commitments. So whether that's 3 months, 6 months, we actually just saw one, a year, 1 full year. And I mean, if I'm going to rent a truck for a year, I mean, that's, you're leasing or owning for 36 to 48 months, maybe even longer. I mean, that's a quarter at least of your payments out the window, and you really don't have anything to show for it. So, if you're in that sticky situation, where you're pushed because you waited and that's the only truck that's available to lease or rent, I think that's the big key of getting ahead of it, right? Is getting that inventory. But they're making you take, I think the earliest I saw was September, but average right now, they're making a minimum of an October 1 rental date, which we used to say, wow, that's crazy, because, it's sitting for 45 days, but it's really not, because you have to hire and get these people in with Schedule L. You have to get your people on the road, plugged in, secure and vetted before, here in the Northeast, like maybe if the snow starts flying or rain or whatever that looks like, you want to make sure your people are safe.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so like I said, so the range, the idea is to start having those conversations. I remember a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with a local rental company and said, yeah, I need 12. And then he was like, oh, I didn't realize you were serious about 12. So I didn't put you down. And I was like, didn't put me down. Like I came to you in August at that time, and we literally rolled into peak and I had to find another solution. So that was a little bit of a wake up call, but plan October to January, and start getting rid of those trucks January 1st if you can. So, 3-month, 4-month rental is probably what you're looking at.
Yeah. Which is really important to kind of just be thinking through and planning on. One, because like you said, if you wait too late, they might not be there. But two, that's just an expense you need to factor in to your ramp up to peak season. That's just kind of a requirement if you don't have any other fleet options, if you don't have enough spares to cover that additional volume.
Yeah, we also, we have a couple connections with some local trucking companies, some expediters that are decommissioning trucks pretty regularly. So, to get a Dodge Sprinter or a Nissan or something like that we can throw somebody in, not 100% ideal, but we do have some rural routes that we use these smaller trucks, as supplemental routes, a little bit smaller workload, a little bit more miles. So they're perfectly nimble for that. You can get them from anywhere from 8 to 14 grand. And if you think about what you're going to pay in rentals,
Plus you resell after.
come January, they're pretty much disposable and you get a little bit of resale out of them. So, if I can offset that and put some cash back in my pocket after what I would have leased it for or rented it for. And then there's the other end of the spectrum of, if you have some trucks and you're already looking for new, that's on the horizon, like, oh, I need 2 more trucks. That would be the time to maybe buy those new trucks if your old trucks can make it through peak, and then you'd have the new truck payment instead of the rental. And then once you come out of peak, you could sell that because the resale value on trucks is pretty good right now.
Yeah.
So just a couple different, and again, we do one or all options depending on what terminal, what trucks are available, what rentals are available. But we weigh all of that based on our territory and our needs.
Yeah. Now, I'd also say too that, you mentioned if you have old trucks that you're trying to get through peak season, those trucks are going to be doing extra mileage, extra hours, and it's even more impactful when a truck goes down during peak season. So how important is maintenance, and how do you think about kind of your maintenance strategy leading up to and during peak season?
When it comes to maintenance, we try to plan ahead. So anything that we know is gonna need brakes, tires, even an oil change, we may prematurely do an oil change 2,000 miles ahead of time, just to know that we won't need to pull that truck off the road during the peak season, so that we can stay ahead of it. If we see brakes that are close to their lifespan, we'll change them ahead of time, so that November, December, when we need trucks on the road, running a 7-day operation, that there are very minimal downtime. We will have issues. We won't run perfect, but we'll have trucks that go down. But we try to minimize that to help us keep the trucks on the road, to keep the drivers in the trucks, helps the frustration levels. And it just really, really helps the business as a whole.
Yeah. We also try to fix all the kind of ticky-tacky things that the drivers are annoyed with, just to make their days and those longer days a little bit, so if the radio's not working, or something's jiggling, or the latch is funny on this, or I have to, it just does this or does that. We try to fix all those kind of little ticky-tacky things that if you're spending, an extra 2 hours in your truck every day at the peak season, that would make your day a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it seems small in some ways to be getting ahead of that, but it is such a big deal if you can eliminate some of those things that if the truck is even down for one day during peak season, it can be the headache that is your last headache, or the one that takes you over the edge. So just trying to get ahead of some of those things. And I think it's a great call out to do things like an oil change 2,000 miles in advance, just so that there's no risk of it being a problem during peak. I think those are just kind of great plans to go ahead and look at your fleet and think about what are the problems I could have in this October to January timeframe, and go ahead and eliminate those, or try to get, minimize them as much as possible.
So the other thing is, if you're in a terminal that uses a local repair shop, so say it's on FedEx premise or near FedEx premise, and that it's just like a contractor go-to, there's going to be a bottleneck, so if you wait until October to get all your oil changes done by November to get you through the peak season, you may be, squeezing in. With us, we do the same thing, but we have our own maintenance shop, but our maintenance shop's peak season is October, because they need to ramp up to get everything on point for go time. And then during November, December, our maintenance staff's a little bit slower. It's just emergencies. It's just, things that kind of come in clutch. So, right now we're doing, we always do tire audits and oil change audits and, DOT inspection audits and those things. But from a preventative maintenance standpoint, we do a report now that's a little bit more extensive. And then we do one in September just to catch anything that we didn't put on the list. And those are just kind of pre-peak, like, hey, keep your eye on this one. It's been getting oil changes a little bit more often, or this one was moved to a rural route, so it's going to need tires a little bit sooner. So just those things, just to keep an eye out. I mean, we have a pretty big fleet, so it's a little bit more work, but each of those terminals is managing to that level of detail, preparing for peak. So they don't just ask the question, does this need tires? They have to think about, does it need tires today? And then what does that look like in September? Just so that we can kind of set ourselves up for success.
We also met with like our local shops. Before we had a maintenance shop of our own, we would meet with the dealerships and the repair guys that worked on our stuff. And we would tell them, hey, we're coming into this kind of crazy season of FedEx. And when something goes down, we can't give it to you for 2 weeks to turn around on a radiator or a big maintenance issue. Could you maybe just kind of keep us in mind when we bring something in that we need it to move quick? And by having that conversation before November 24th or 25th, they kind of plan for it. So when we do have an issue, we could take it in. They would usually kind of, I don't want to say bump you to the front of the line, but I'm going to say bump you to the front of the line, because we're good customers. We give them a lot of business, and and they really kind of took care of us
Mhm.
more peaks than not to push us through and to get us work through the shop quicker.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, so that's a lot on the truck side. Let's talk staffing some. And one of the things I've heard you say is that you're going to stop hiring seasonally. So what do you mean by that, and how does it kind of factor into what you're doing right now?
So we stopped hiring seasonal employees probably 4 years ago. And the reason being is because the volume, I mean, even through COVID and, economic change and growth, also, covering for contractors in the area, contingency, whatever that looks like. We haven't laid anyone off ever. And it's always just kind of ramped up and then it's plateaued and then ramped up and then plateaued. And that's how we grew from, one guy to almost 200 employees. It's never, got to the point where I'm like, okay, season's over, see ya. A lot of those people that, it's worked out where they've only wanted to work part-time. Landscapers go back to work, but they want to stay on the weekends because most of their landscape stuff is during the week because people are entertaining on the weekends. So they don't want the landscapers at their house. So, we've maintained a lot of those people, and sometimes people are burned out or they just don't cut it after peak. So it's kind of whether it's shaken out. But by advertising seasonal, you're cutting out a huge chunk of your workforce, the employable pool. The other thing with that is obviously if you are intending on cutting people, don't lie to them, don't set them up for failure. But we've been in a very fortunate situation where we've never had to lay off after peak. So we've stopped saying they're seasonal jobs. We're just hiring more people. Whether that's, and hiring early has its challenges. I think that's kind of the next point to that is, if you're hiring in July and August, you're not making that kind of money in July and August, you're not making peak money. So where do you get, and then FedEx is managing you to lean and efficient. So like all these contradictions, but then if you don't train them appropriately, then they get in accidents and then you're facing Schedule L. So you have like these three things that all need to align perfectly for go time, right? And the big thing that we've been doing is we bring people in, whether that's vacation to help cover vacations, right? July, August, September, some of our biggest vacation months. We have a big fleet. Our vacation days, over 1,000 days a week or 1,000 days a year, we give, that people have earned because we have a lot of tenure as well. So for us, we use that time to give people their earned time off, but also give some people, 4-day weeks or 5-day weeks at their leisure. They can choose to take a day here and there. We can get the new people plugged in. So it's really worked out. The people that have been with us for a long time do like to take days off in October. They're like, here it comes.
Yeah.
Right. So they're definitely looking forward to that extra time off. So giving people, different schedules and time off before the holidays. It allows us to do some safety audits and ride-alongs for the people that maybe haven't been through a peak yet. It's allowed us to have some CT renewal classes. So that's coming up. It's been 2 years. So we were one of the, because of our tenure and our contract dates, we had to have almost everybody by that June 4th date. And I can't believe it's been 2 years since that.
Yeah, I know, right?
Like, it just rolled out, but it is 2 years. So we've been using that time to give people those dates. We pull them off route and throw them in the 1-day class refresher. We also use this time to upsize and cross train. So some of our kind of guys that are in those 12-foot box trucks, give them an opportunity to move into a 14 or a 16, that 20K upsize, essentially, or move somebody from a P700 to a P1000 or a 1200, but allow them to be upsized and use those drivers because it's not a qual cert upsize, it's an internal upsize or a route change upsize. Allow those people to cross train. right? Also just from different types of routes. So maybe a country guy gets a chance to learn a city route just because you don't know what happens at peak. Whether that's injuries or call-offs or illnesses or whatever happens, the contingency plan for us is always internal first, right? Leaving boxes on the dock is never an option for us. So whatever that looks like, we also send some of our senior drivers to our other terminals to train so that they can just get an idea of kind of what that looks like there, get them, available in the system at the other terminal and things like that. So it's a big deal, but you can avoid being overstaffed and pinching your efficiency if if you kind of manage to it. But the days of, saying, okay, I'm ready to hire you, you can start November 1st. Those days don't exist anymore. Not if you're looking to maintain your safety.
Yeah, it's safety and schedule, I think, are the biggest. Like, you could bring people in November, but it's not typically going to work out for you. And this is one of the other important things. I think this is one of the hardest things for people who are acquiring a business at this time of year, is that, you go to buy a business based on the NOI of the business. And then as you're heading towards a closing, ideally right now, people are starting to see payroll increase. Like, that's kind of the thing you need right now as you're heading up to peak season, which can make a business look less attractive. But it's one of those things where if you're starting right now and in these next few months, there aren't any additional drivers added to the business, there's probably something that's a problem there. And so while from an NOI perspective, it may look great, you may be in semi-dire straits once you take over and head into peak season and have to scramble to find these last minute drivers. So that's one of those balancing acts that you kind of have to be aware of if you are standing up soon on a business, is that payroll might start to increase, but that's not a bad thing. You really would want a surplus of drivers heading into this first operation, especially this time of year. And that's why also when we show projections and we're showing valuations of these businesses, we don't include the revenue or the expenses from peak season to kind of show you a normalized view of the business, because those things are going to happen. But it can really start to change the way the business looks for like the last, really this middle stretch. But when you're ramping up and peak revenue hasn't started yet, can be one of the points where your profitability looks the least attractive, but you have to do it or you won't be ready.
You're also staying off kind of the fight and the competitiveness for that employable pool, right? Yeah. So if you start in October, you're going to be fighting every other contractor, every other Amazon contractor, every other UPS, company that's trying to hire package handlers and delivery people and, whatever that looks like. And those Indeed ads are going to cost more just to get a little bit of, placement. You're going to find a lot of job hoppers at Christmas time or at peak time where they're, going to want to come over to you to get that whatever, and then they'll leave after. So we've just found that we find a better candidate in the July-August timeframe. And then, we kind of do a calculation, based on the stops, and we figure out how many resources we're going to need. We push everybody to a mandatory 6 from peak, which is it's usually like the 15th to the 18th of November through Christmas Day. Everybody's on a mandatory 6, line haul and P&D. And, or if you're on a 4-day schedule, you pick up a 5. If you're on a 3-day schedule, everybody picks up 1. So, for me, across our pool, you're looking at, 170 extra resources, and we just move schedules around a little bit. So at the end of the day, by moving everybody to, in my 12 route contract, I get 12 extra resources right out of the rip. And then I back into how many I really need to manage the volume and then hire those people. We've also been up against people that have said like, hey, I found a part-time guy and they do like driver sharing with another contractor. We've gone against that model just because we find that once you allow somebody to go to another contractor, the grass could be greener, or maybe it's greener on our side and then the other contractor loses out. But it's almost better at that point to keep that person full-time for you and then offer to take those stops. You get the revenue, helps you offset that part-time or, that kind of sharing person. But you can take the stops rather than give them the driver. And then obviously contingency and neighboring areas is always a great way to, stay off the early hire, right? If your volume isn't there, offer to send one of your senior guys to a different terminal or to a different contract area, and while you train the new person locally. So, that's also another option when it comes to staying off that kind of extra expense and that overstaffed, possibility.
And right there, you talked a little bit about your calculation for deciding how many resources you think you'll need. So I know that this is basically right now and next week or in the past week, you're already getting projections from the terminal. So what does that look like in terms of what the terminal gives you, and how do you balance that against kind of making your own resource planning?
You could take that one.
We had an example last week that the terminal sent us a projection, and that was for a peak day. So that's 1 to 3 days of volume. It will be this max number. So we know that we can plan for less. We'll have 3 kind of days where we're blown out, but we'll get through it, and we'll make sure we have enough staff to make it through those 3 days.
Managers might be in a truck.
The managers will have to jump in and help, and it'll be all hands on deck, but we'll get through those 3 tricky days. What I like to do is I get into last year's DSW, and I'll get in there and I'll remember what our busiest day was, or I'll pop around and see what the busiest day is, compare it to the number they gave us, see how close it is. This was actually very close, and they said we were going to need 41 resources. We had the stop count was almost identical, and we did it with 37 resources. So I know they said 41, but we will be able to handle it with 37, 38 resources. So we take the numbers, we kind of process some, think about it. And I know anyone that's new kind of has to do that and figure out what works and what doesn't. But if you come up with the average stop count for your fleet, you can work backwards and kind of hit it right where it needs to kind of land for you and what you think will work.
And that will open up an honest conversation. So Dave had that conversation with management at the terminal, brought it back to me, and we kind of, noodled it in the one terminal with our manager and said, what does this look like? And he was like, yeah, 37, 38, that looks like where we're at. And then you can have an honest conversation and say, like, why do you think that, why'd you give me 41? And, and then that comes to that kind of icky conversation that I've heard over and over, which is, why do I have to hire 41 when that contractor over there hasn't hired anyone, right? They're debunking peak. I'm not hiring anybody. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. And you're like, okay, but then I have to cover. So then you have to make that decision at your business level to say, am I willing to do flex, right? For a cost. Not for free, but am I willing to hire those people and give that extra volume and opportunity? It helps with call-offs, right? So if you plan to say, yes, I'm going to help my neighbor, or I'm going to go help in a different terminal, maybe you do need 41, or whatever that looks like, but to be honest and have that honest conversation that says, I think I can do it with 38. Why are you telling me 41? What are the numbers? Because they're the ones that for 12 months or 10 months out of the year are talking to you about running 1 less, 2 less, 1 less, 2 less. And then at peak, you're like, oh, I got this at 38. And they're like, yeah, I think you need 3 more. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. So I think it really does. If you have your numbers together and you double check them, you don't have to take their numbers at point blank. And really kind of we do a little bit of a deeper layer. We talk to some of our shippers on the line haul side. We have that insight as to what the manufacturers and shippers are doing. So it's nice when they ask for, hey, we're going to need 10 more trailers from step 2 toys. Then I know what our shipper, what our local is going to look like also, because that's ramping up a different percentage as well. So it's good to have that insight. But I think being able to have that honest conversation with FedEx and hold them to the numbers and ask the questions has really benefited us. And gotten to that more transparent level of relationship with them regarding resources and planning, because it is expensive. And I don't think they realize 6 to 8 weeks until somebody's 100% turnkey on average, right? Like 100% turnkey ready for peak. You're looking at 6 to 8 weeks with the CT training and all that good stuff. That's a huge expense if you really didn't need them,
Yeah.
So having your numbers accurate is definitely important.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of really important points to just call out and remind there. One is that in general, you're going to get kind of an overestimation from FedEx, just the way they will do it, because they would always rather you be able to cover everything and there are no problems during peak season. So none of their shippers, none of their customers get mad because you've got more than enough resources. But obviously there's an expense to that. But if you just go in and tell FedEx they're wrong without any backup, without having done any research on your own, that's not a great situation for you to be in either. So it's good to have conversations with the terminal manager, but do your research. And I think the simplest way to look at it is to look at how many stops they're projecting, compare that to last year's DSWs. And even if you're a new contractor, you can get those from the previous contractor and just look at stops, look at the resources they're projecting, and at least see how those stack up and see how many they did it, and at least have that. But all of the additional things you talked about from a research perspective are even better. But if you at least do that first step of comparing, that's a good step. But the other thing that I think is really important that you talked about there is knowing what your neighbors are doing, like in terms of how well equipped are they for the volume that's coming. Because for people who don't know, who've never done a peak season, there's part of peak where you could be called on to do the neighboring stops if a contractor can't keep up with their stop. So what's the best way you've found to kind of find out how well others in adjacent territories are doing from a planning perspective?
Oh, well, the terminal's not allowed to tell you.
Right, exactly.
We just talk to them
Okay.
and just ask how they are.
What's your plan?
Yeah,
Yeah.
how it's going.
And ideally, I mean, and I think for the most part, Dave, when you go into those pre-peak meetings, you get the grumpy guy that's like, screw you guys, I'm not hiring anybody. And he usually says that, whether he or she, they usually do pretty much fess up to, I'm not hiring anybody, or I'm not doing this, or I'm not going to do flex. Whereas you can get an idea. You can also, tell whether somebody's having a ton of turnover right now. If somebody's having turnover right now and they're not doing a ton to change their business model, they're going to struggle. So, kind of, I think by now you see what the writing on the wall looks like. So, where you're going to be, and what that looks like as far as flex.
Yeah, I think those are just important points to think about, because even if you perfectly plan for yourself, if you didn't take into account that all three of your neighbors didn't do any planning and are all suddenly struggling, then you might not have planned properly and you might suddenly be struggling yourself trying to keep up with what they didn't do.
Yeah.
So in just kind of a last question before we I cover a couple things and we go to Q&A. How do you treat payment of your drivers during peak season? Do you do any kind of different bonus? Do you do any different kind of pay plans at all? Or do you just kind of say you're working an extra day, you get paid more for that extra day? Is there anything different you guys do there?
So we do incentives. In Ohio, we are under that kind of hourly for our small trucks, the hourly mandate where you have to pay hourly. You can't pay piece, eaches or piecemeal at all. You can't pay flat rate incentives, like a per day flat incentive. And we, because of the cross coverage of different route types, going 7 days, our big truck guys might help with a small truck on the weekend, or if there's a breakdown, you go from a dually to a single axle. We pay everybody in that hourly model, even if they're big trucks. And then we do a stop threshold where they can earn a percentage. State of Ohio, there's a CFR 49, allows you to pay a percentage incentive at the end, which would include any regular overtime hours. So you can pay a percentage and they can earn whatever that percentage is. So between 5 and, usually it's between 5 and 25% they can earn. We increase that at the holiday time to basically 5 to 70% you can earn. I have some guys that go out with 400 stops a day. So they're doing 2 jobs. So they're going to earn it They make a ton of money, and rightfully so.
Yeah, they
But
save you a ton of money. Yeah.
they do, and they're safe, and they've been with us for a really long time. But we, at the kind of beginning of October, sit down with our managers and have a realistic conversation about what the person's max is. So to maintain service, to maintain morale, to maintain culture, to maintain mental capabilities and safety, what is that person's absolute, like, if you had to do it for 3 days out of the entire year, what would that person's max be? And we have that conversation honestly, and then they have the conversations with their people and, say, hey, I think you can do 140. You think you're good for that? And they're like, ooh. And he's like, 3 days out of the year, can you do that? So we have this honest conversation, and then we, based on that number, we come up with kind of what it looks like on 6 days. And we do a little bit, just to kind of keep them rolling and keep them moving. We do a weekly number based on that daily average, but the daily average we do 5.5 times, not 6 days. Okay, so it gives them a little bit of a cushion and that carrot to say, okay, so if it was 100 over 6, it would be 550, just for quick math.
Mhm.
And then once they hit that, every 50 stops, we give them another kind of level up into that percentage. But we do it weekly because you can lose, right? You're working 7 days. A lot of that premium is worked on Sunday. So you're blown out, Sunday, but maybe not on Monday. You come in and you're like, whoa, what am I doing with all these people here, right? So you can't bonus people. Yeah, weather. If in Ohio, we've had days where they've delayed dispatch, or 82s are just so bad that you can't get in the driveways. So then that shifts it, right? And then, but you have to have it be an attainable number of stops, but we don't pay per stop because it's illegal here in Ohio. But we also, so those different things that go into that percentage, also, if they're maintaining 6 days, if their safety is still maintained, if their culture is still maintained, no call-offs, right? So all of these things we weigh in, because it's easy to be awesome 3 days out of 6 when you really need them there 6. So we have to make sure that it's sustainable and manageable, and that the driver knows kind of what everything looks like. So we do change that. One thing that I will say is every year we do tweak it a little bit. We take what we've learned from last year and apply it, whether we overpaid somebody or whether we overworked somebody or whether we underpaid somebody, whatever that looks like. Not necessarily under, but maybe they could have earned a little bit more, or maybe they're more seasoned this year. So we take that, and I always run it past our employment law team. Just to make sure that anything I've come up with in my crazy creative head doesn't come back to bite me at the end of the year, or, during an audit. So, specifically, that's why I'm literally working on it now as to what I think it's going to look like. And then we'll roll it out to the team, get some feedback from, our people once they see it. So that's usually like October. They know what they're looking for. They know, they get excited about it. It's something worth working on. But that's, we definitely have to get that ahead of time, because you can get yourself on, thinking, oh, well, I'll just pay an extra $1 a stop, or I'll pay an extra, whatever, once you hit this threshold. And that may not be legal in your state. So, just to keep an eye on, keep that, kind of bee floating around in your bonnet.
Yeah, always review it with a wage and hour attorney that is from the state that you're operating in, because there can be wild differences state to state when it comes to some of those compliance things. But another thing is, $1 a stop bonus might sound great in your head, but it might be more money than you can afford to pay. So it's also important to kind of think through, if you've got a guy doing 150 stops and they're capable of doing 250 during peak, think through what that extra incentive is going to look like if they hit that 250 consistently, because you can't blow yourself out just because it seemed like a good incentive at the time. So it's really critical to, as early as you can, and I think this is a great time of year to do it, is kind of think through who's there, what you think they're capable, all the things that Amy's talked about there, and kind of apply it to a pay plan and an incentive plan, because you do want to give these guys a little bit of incentive to work harder during a very hard time of the year. And
well, it's called a bonus.
Yeah.
I tell people this, all the time. It's called a bonus for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? It's not part of your everyday compensation program. We pay you fairly, during the normal time. And this is a bonus for a reason. So you have to make sure you come to work on time. You have to make sure you wear your uniform. You have to make sure that you're meeting all of the guidelines, all the days of the week. And then you can earn a bonus based on those things also. Because we want it to be, kind of the norm and then some, not, well, I did 800 stops for you, but I hit a mailbox and, and my service was 80%. No, you have to do all of that status quo and then earn the bonus. And to your point, that affordability is where we've noticed the weekly average definitely helps, because it does help with the dips in volume, the weather, and things like that. So it allows us to average out that, maybe they did 300 stops one day, but the next day they only did 85. Maybe I didn't even get my money's worth out of you on that one day, and then you earned a bonus. So those might shake out. And to have those conversations, you can still bonus the person on the 300 because that's a killer day. But in a normal standpoint, if it's like, 160, 110, and then 140, 140, 140, that should, normalize so that you're not losing on the slow days and having to overpay on the heavy days.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over upcoming the new listing this week and upcoming events, and then we're going to have time for a few Q&A questions. So there's a few already in. If you have any, type them in quick, and we might do a lightning round to get through a few of them. But new listing for this week is out of Idaho. This is 7 P&D routes at $625,000. 9 employees, 1 manager. So it's a smaller operation, but really well built, profitable with newer model vehicles as well. And so if you're looking at something in the Idaho area, that's a nice starter size business to get you in. If you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out to our team. We can give you all the details. Event wise, the biggest one is the Expo, which is coming up in less than a month now, or 3 or 4 weeks away, which is in Dallas, the first week of August. And if you're a new investor watching, we do new investor summits throughout the year, and we're actually going to have one the day before the summit kicks off. So the summit there is officially Saturday and Sunday, but there will also be a new investor summit that it happens the day before on that Friday. So that morning to afternoon. And if you're coming to the Expo already, you can attend that summit for free. So if you haven't registered and you're interested in doing so for that new investor summit the day before the Expo, feel free to go to the website. You can register now. Also, the Expo is free to register for. So if you haven't registered, it is free to attend. And today is actually the last day for the hotel discount. So if you're trying to get that discount on hotel rooms, you might actually be able to do it tomorrow. So you actually have through the end of tomorrow, but treat it like today if you want to not forget it. The full schedule for the Expo actually, I think, went out in an email while we were talking today. So if you're looking for that full agenda, it is out as well. And then the last thing quickly is we do have a happy hour next week in Memphis. So Tuesday, July 16th. So if you're in the Memphis area, we do have a happy hour, a kind of a networking free event. So if you want to come out and attend and meet our team, meet contractors in the area, that is completely free to attend and register for as well. So let me quickly go through some of these questions. So a quick and easy one. At the Expo, will you have a segment covering EMS, emergency medical services? Yes, and we might even have an ambulance there on the Expo floor. So tune in, but we will. It is on the agenda that went out too, and you'll see some of that. Now, one that I know is interesting to kind of think about. I believe you guys had some express volume last peak season. What, if anything, should people expect differently for express during peak season? Do you get enough of a bump or enough time deliveries that it matters, that it's really something to plan differently than your normal express volume, or is it just more of the same?
It was pretty new last year. So we just put the express on with our ground volume, and the ground drivers delivered the express volume as well, because we increased the fleet size in that specific terminal for the peak season. So we since we added so many drivers, we just kind of spread the express volume out
Mhm.
and would kind of just disperse it out.
We did have, one of our managers kind of did, I guess, like a contingency. And she would sweep, some of the more urgent ones, to make sure that we got them, or if somebody had a ton of some of our city areas or the industrial areas that had more express, she would take those off of that person. So we did plan that resource, pretty much through peak. We went live Halloween with peak or with express. So it was a little bit shaky for us. We adapted the first week. We did try to overlap it, and then we switched gears and put it on everybody.
We did run into the pickup side. Everything had to be back to the terminal. That was express pickups by whatever time the terminal has. I think ours was 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
So we would have to have management go out and maybe sweep some of these trucks to get that volume back to the terminal before the 6 o'clock cut, so that the drivers could stay out and finish their deliveries that they had left on their trucks for the day. So that was probably a little bit of a change that we had to adapt to, but we made it through and we got creative with it, and it really turned into success.
That peak bonus threshold for those drivers was much lower, right? So everybody else kind of came into, hey, I've been here a year, I'm expected to do a little bit more. We took that into account. The big thing for us too, from a terminal standpoint, is the planes were quite late through the peak season. So expect that later dispatch. We did get, a lot of clearances and waived on the delivery. So the 1030s became 12s, the 12s became 2s. So we were, got a little bit of grace on some of those, tight delivery times, because it was the plane that was late. So that was probably the biggest thing in express.
Got it. Okay, a couple of quick ones here is kind of our last two questions. So what should a contractor expect when they're standing up on a business for the first time, when they come into a terminal on a Saturday and it's their first Saturday ever? I can speak a little bit to this, but what have you guys seen as kind of what that first day looks like?
Well, hopefully it wasn't their first day.
Yeah.
If they're standing up, hopefully they were shadowing for a little bit. Have already met with their team. I mean, it's not like your first day at a new job, right? So I would say, hopefully, I know Route Consultant, when they sell routes, they do a really good job of pairing you with someone and kind of having that transition period, continue through maybe the first 30, 45 days, whatever that looks like, whatever it's negotiated. But hopefully you're not there by yourself. But I think the biggest thing is to just watch, listen, and really take those notes and be prepared to, to listen and to act. It's going to be overwhelming, and then your first day on your own is going to be a whole nother, kind of chunk. But I think the biggest thing is just be there. Even if, whether that's an AO in place, if you're an investor, whether it's an angel investor or just an investor in general, and you're not planning to go to the terminal, whoever that person is, that's going to be your person, they need to be there, and show face. And even if you're struggling, when the terminal sees you there, they're going to be able to work with you.
Yeah. And just, whatever you may be picturing as whatever kind of, formal handoff this is going to look like, it's none of that. There's no pomp or ceremony. You're going to basically just be the business owner immediately after you sign like the bill of sale and you're done. And then they transfer it into your name and now you're the owner. And that's the last handoff FedEx does with you. Like at that point, they expect you to be fully ready to go. And so that first day, in a perfect world, it's a Saturday. Hopefully Saturday's a little bit lighter for your territories and maybe it's an easy day and you're done a little early. But I think Amy's advice is great. One, make sure that you're there. Make sure that you're present, that you're projecting confidence and stability for all of your drivers, so they feel like nothing's changing. Their payroll's still there. They're still going to get paid. Their route ideally is exactly the same for that day. You don't want to change anything at the beginning. You want them to think that the only thing that's changing is the name of the person who's paying their paychecks. You can change things later, but you can't do it early. You got to earn that kind of confidence and help your employees feel more comfortable with you as the new owner before you start making changes. But we always like to say in a perfect world, nothing happens, but it's just the luck of the draw that first week might be when 3 trucks break. So as much contingency planning as you can do before you stand up, the better off you'll be, the better able to handle when something inevitably goes wrong in that first week. And so lean on the resources you have, both ideally in some kind of transition support with the seller and that manager to kind of be your support on that day. But it's very possible that your first day you are there for dispatch, your drivers leave, and then there's nothing else that happens. So that could be as little of a ceremony as you have on that first day.
Yeah.
The last question I will just point to, somebody was asking basically, they see in listings stuff about seller discretionary earnings and NOI. So how do you figure out how much you take away as an owner of that amount on listing? So just as a general note, and then you guys might chip in with kind of how you think about what you save in the business versus what you pay yourselves. But when you see on listings that SDE or the NOI at the bottom of our listings, what we're showing is EBITDA. So we're showing the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So out of that chunk, there are some things you will have to pay for before you pay yourself. So things like taxes. Good news is that this business is pretty tax advantageous. So a lot of that are things that you can offset. For instance, when you're looking at most tax returns, or a lot of tax returns in this business that are often showing very low income or negative because of just the ways that you can depreciate and offset your revenue. But also anything that you're paying for in terms of financing. So any kind of loan that you take out, that's also something you'll have to pay for out of that chunk. And then anything that you set aside to reinvest back into the business, as opposed to just the money that you're paying yourself. So the reason we do it that way is a lot of those things are the choice of the owner. So it's a choice on how much you finance and how much you set aside in the business and how you structure the business in terms of how you leverage it from a tax perspective. So it's that chunk to kind of cover those expenses and to pay yourself. Some people choose not to pay themselves, to completely reinvest in the business. There's lots of different ways to look at it. It kind of depends on what's most important for you. Is growth and equity where you're focusing right now? Or is it, I'm trying to keep my business kind of just chugging along and pay myself as much as possible? Like there's different structures, different ways you can build the business, but that's what that kind of chunk of money is for, and the additional things you'll have to cover. And so I know that lots of different ways you may think about it, but Amy, is there, and Dave, is there any kind of general rule you try to think about in terms of how much to set aside to reinvest into the fleet, prepare for the future, anything like that is a good rule of thumb for people to think about?
So this is the hardest question. And I find that the conversation happens on even some of the Facebook groups or even at conventions and conferences where somebody's like, well, I'm at 45% with my payroll. And then, but that's like that's like calculated, right, to the beholder, right? Do you offer benefits? Do you calculate that? Or is it just wages? Do you, so whatever those things are that you add in, right? Do you have management? How hands-on are you? So my payroll is much higher than, say, the guy that is the BC, right? The AO that's there in a truck running every day. His is much lower than maybe mine, because, Dave and I do take a paycheck from the business, but we take a small chunk from all of the different entities, including line haul, and then we manage those savings through those other diversifications that we have with our maintenance and our tow and, some of the other things that we do. So it's a little bit different. So I think that the question is, that maybe there's a percentage that range is, the more hands-off you want to be, the less money you're going to make. So I think it's a very tricky question, and it really has to do with the operation itself, the staff that you're acquiring, right? Is it a hands-off staff? Are they all P1000 drivers? Are they smaller truck drivers? So whatever that mix looks like. So it's a very messy calculation, and whether you're looking to take a paycheck, right? If you took this step down from your job, your full-time job, and said, this is what I'm going to do now, you can take a paycheck because you're going to be doing a lot of the work. If you think that you're not going to be at the terminal and you're not going to jump in a truck, then that piece is going to be smaller. We have five we have a layer of 5 managers that oversee our local terminals. They're technically the AOs. And we talk about a little bit about this in some of the sessions at the RC convention, but we talk about that extra layer. You know, so Dave and I don't pay ourselves maybe what one person with one operation would pay. We pay a little bit of each of that to make our salaries. So it's a little bit of a fuzzy question, but I think the question goes back to the person and to ask them specifically, what is your involvement going to be? You know, how hands-on, and are you, you know, are you looking to hire BCs, or do you have experienced BCs, and kind of what that looks like? Are you going to offer benefits? So, you know, all that has to come from somewhere, you know, so that even a number, though it's great, right? And it can look fantastic, it chips away. You know, we offer a really heavy benefit plan. This year, it actually just hit me today. 4th of July week was on payroll last week, and I had a ton of people use their PTO for their vacation day, because we don't pay the holiday, but they can use their PTO day. And then we had some people take long weekends. So it was a very hefty PTO week on a short revenue week, which is a double-edged sword, right? Like, having tenured people makes for a better company, but it comes with expenses. So those things all add up. So again, you know, how involved do you want to be? When you know, and that involvement's going to swing. The larger your operation, the more high-level conversations and business conversations you're going to have. So you're going to be busy. And at that smaller contract level, you're going to have your hands in the pot because you're going to be running the contract solo. You know, and where in the middle do you want to be from a pay yourself or, you know, kind of hands-off standpoint? So it's a great question. I could spend all day on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the answer, is that a lot of it's going to come down to how you know, are prioritizing your time, your resources, and how you're thinking about the future of your business. And there's a lot of things to think about there. And so, like I said, the reason we show that chunk is because there's so many different decisions that relate to how you plan on operating the business that can really change how you think about it. So, one, that is, you know, this is a lot of different perspectives we've given on how you can, but if you're trying to struggle and map that out and think through it for your business, it's things that we're always happy to talk about and help on an individual basis, because a lot of times that's what it is. But I think that is all we have time for. We went, you know, even a minute over with so many questions. So, Amy, Dave, thank you guys so much for being here and providing your expertise. And everyone who's on the webinar, thank you all for being here. So we will see you all in the next webinar, and ideally we'll see everyone in August in a few weeks, and we can all meet in person instead of just having to talk to you know, just our faces on a video screen. We can have a, you know, get a handshake, have a beer, and have a good weekend. So thanks guys for being here, and thank you all for joining.